Um, I'll just introduce Arisudan. I interviewed him for a feature 4 years ago. And then thanks to Facebook, we've been following each other's work. Arisudan has posts have always been inspiring, and he does really crazy and amazing things. So it's been good to know him and to follow his work. So he's a techie at heart and an oil and gas consultant by profession. As a side hustle, he hosts two podcasts on Hindi poetry. The first one is on Madhushala, an epic poetry written in 1930s by Dr. Harivansh Rai Bachchan. Arisudan feels that Madhusala is one of the most misunderstood poems of Hindi literature. His podcast is an attempt to explain the philosophical essence of Madhushala, what they mean in the current scenario, along with stories from the poet's life. He hosts another podcast on poetry of optimism, beauty, and hope. Arisudan lives in Bangalore but has lived in over 20 cities in last 2 decades. And sometime back, we came to know that he's also spent a few good years in Pune. So he's literally one of us. So welcome, Arisudan.
Thanks a lot, Kinjal. Pune is still very close to my heart because that's where I started my professional journey. So, all the initial years of being or learning, at least the work, and that was also my kind of startup experience before startup was school. So, a lot of work, a lot of, and Pune is a place where you can do a lot of non-work stuff as well. At least back then, we could bike to Lonavala, Khandala, Mahabaleshwar any weekend. I don't know how possible that is now with traffic and other things. But back then, it used to take just about 20 minutes from Vimannagar to Pune University on a bike. So those were the days. Uh, and that was about 20 years ago. So after that, I moved out of Pune, and then ever since I've been moving to so many cities and so many places, but kind of settled in Bangalore for last 4.5, 5 years. So stationed at one place. But thanks for the introduction. So yeah, like Kinjal said, I was a techie. I'm a techie at heart still. Although the nature of my work has changed to more of oil and gas consulting. Uh, but the idea of podcast has been around because I've been listening to podcasts for a long time during my morning walk or drive, and sometime at leisure as well. There are so many topics and so much of beautiful content across the globe. So basically, for India, podcasting itself is not uh, very old. It's been just about 2.5 years, and specifically, it started exploding last year because of lockdown. There was so much of emphasis on audio content. All of a sudden, so in just about a year and a half, we have seen almost 70 to 75% growth, which is massive for any kind of industry or any kind of work for that matter. But across the globe, especially US, podcasting has been, I think, as old as Apple iPods, and that's where the name comes from. Uh, when Apple iPods were cool about 21, 22 years ago, I think in 2004, somebody started making audio content and started putting it on iPods. And that's where the name came podcast, and it has stayed ever since. It was basically more of democratization of audio content. So people could create what they wanted to create, people could listen to it. It's all free, there was no charges or anything. Now, obviously, with so much of evolution of so many things, companies like Apple, Spotify, they started some premium model where you have to pay for certain premium podcasts, specifically the ones hosted by either celebrities or somebody who is a real pro or super popular or super famous. So those people still charge, and some people put a lot of research into creating content. If it's a scientific podcast or something which deals with certain part of history, all those kind of things, or even for some certain comedy shows. So as long as there is some premium content, people do charge, but that is still a huge or ever a very tiny minority. So, almost 99% content is still free. It's just about 1% or even less than 1% for which people have to pay. So, and in fact, initially people did not really start making podcasts for money or for their bread and butter. It was more of a hobby profession or more of a academic idea for that matter. So people started just like that. If I'm doing some research or I want to do some kind of analysis and I want to talk about it or want to conduct a panel discussion, which I think may be useful for people, then somebody will record it and upload it using something called RSS feed that probably will come to in a bit. So this is the background of podcasting and where we are today. But if we talk about why podcasting, and especially if I can quickly talk about my journey, because a lot of people that I know, they have been through similar path at some point of time. But for me, the reason or the purpose was that I always loved Madhushala, and I always thought this is one poetry which has been very misunderstood from the very beginning. The moment you say Madhushala, people think it's about wine because the literal meaning is the house of wine. So a lot of people think it's a tale of somebody who has been alcoholic, and that's how people associated with Mr. Harivansh Rai Bachchan and Madhushala. So he was asked a lot of questions about that. He was criticized a lot that you are writing a poetry in praise of uh, wine or liquor for that matter. But the real essence, when it was written, why it was written, and there is so much of philosophy behind it, uh, that is generally not shared, not in these times, not even back then. So I started Googling and I wanted some content where I could find the whole poetry, number one, because many of you must have heard Manna Day's collection of 20 verses from Madhushala. That is the most popular album and really good. But beyond those 20 verses, it's very hard to find the rest of Madhushala. Madhushala is a collection of about 139 verses, and in the cassette or in the audio, we just get about 20. So I was looking for that, and I could not find anywhere, not on Spotify, not on YouTube, not even in books. Uh, and explanation also is hardly there in public domain. So that's what I thought that, I've been reading this poetry for quite some time, and I've been reading about Mr. Bachchan also. So I thought probably I'll do this. I'll read the whole poetry and I'll keep explaining the meaning of that, and I'll tell stories from Mr. Bachchan's life and around the poem itself, and also see how some of that philosophy, because this was based entirely on his own experiences. This was a difficult time in his life, from money perspective, from personal relationship perspective. There were some deaths in the family, one after the other. So very difficult time, and that poetry came out of his own thoughts and experiences, and whatever else was going on in his mind. So there was a lot of trigger. So I thought I'll explain all of that, or try to see how it relates in even in today's scenario. There is a lot of management gyan as well in this poetry, and probably I'll give some examples during the course of our conversation. But that was the main idea, and that's how I thought, okay, अब करना ही है. If I really want to do it, then I need some learning. And that's where I started. Okay, what are the key components of podcasting? What all you need? I have been listening to a lot of podcasts, so at least from a listener's perspective, I had an idea what people like and what should be the format, what should be the duration, the frequency, and the basic structure. So all those things were okay, but the technical gyan was a different thing. What do you do for recording? What do you do for hosting? Uh, how do you edit your audio? How do you publish it? So a lot of those pieces. But again, it's not rocket science. I think it's super easy once you start doing it and once you start learning it. It took me about I think 2-3 weeks time to get used to with audio editing and the recording pieces. And then it was more of a matter of getting the right content, my own research on that, the script that I wanted to have, and then getting the right voice for recording. Uh, and then just a matter of getting it out, getting feedback, and then keep improving on the basis of that feedback. So those were the few initial steps, or some of the initial challenges. And then once you are live, then you are open to public. You are vulnerable. You are open to feedback, all sorts of feedback. It could be critical, it could be appreciation, and whatnot. But you just have to take it all in your stride and in your journey, and keep improving on the basis of that. So it's not like once you publish your podcast, you cannot change it. If you think you have released 2 or 3 episodes, and if you want to change something in your episode 1, you can always go back and do that. So that's quite possible. So once you get some feedback and people say, boss, you made a mistake there, your pronunciation was not correct of certain things, or uh, that event is not correct in case of historical podcast and all. So people always go back and they can change that little piece of audio. So that's always possible. So it's always good to have that continuous feedback from people, friends, and whoever the listeners are. So this has been the journey and background. But feel free to stop me at any time. You can raise hand or unmute yourself and just ask question, or if you have something to share, feel free to share, because I wanted to keep it kind of mutually learning session. So I take more pieces from this session than you do. That's the idea. So feel free to stop me at any time. I'll take a quick pause here if anybody has any comments.
So, Arisudan, I had a question of when you said that you started listening to podcasts on your morning walks, and that is how the idea came. So, at that time, were you listening to Indian podcasts? Like, what was the scene of Indian podcasts then when you started?
So there were hardly any Indian podcasts back then. And I'm talking about, up to 2019. There were very, very few. And there was no Indian platform for podcast as well. What you see today, Ghana or JioSavan, Wink, and several others like Kuku FM, Hubhopper, and whatnot, uh, they were either not there. I mean, the new ones that I said, Kuku FM, Hubhopper, and all, they were not even there. But the ones which were there, like Ghana and JioSavan and all, they were only into music. The whole podcast option itself came in 2020 on these platforms. So first of all, there was no podcast on any of these platforms. So the only ones which were there were on Google or Apple or Spotify to some extent. And most of that, initial podcast that at least I remember from India was number one about business. Like, I remember something on share market. There was something motivational. There was something about poetry, but very few. I think there was not even in thousands, maybe. It was really hard to find any Indian content, and forget about Hindi content, that was barely there, uh, at least until 2019. So, but I was living in the US until 2014, and a lot of people used to listen to podcasts. So I started listening from there during my drive time at times. And most of the podcasts that I used to listen to at that point of time, they were all kind of, technology oriented or some news and analysis oriented, what's happening in the world, those kind of things. But gradually, a lot of people started making content on varied subjects about relationships, about psychology and history. That is something I really love. So a lot of good content after that. I think in last 5-6 years we have seen a major explosion across the globe, and India is just about last 2 years. So yeah, that's how it has been.
Yeah, Arisudan, I have a question.
Sure, Pratmesh.
So you mentioned that you had to get used to the technical aspect of it. So what kind of a, I checked your podcast, you have a good sound, and I wanted to know what kind of a microphone do you use?
So I'll share the name of the microphone. It's not something very expensive. I think it was about 3,000 or 4,000 rupees. It's Maona. Maona. It's available on Amazon,
Okay.
and I can probably show it to you. It's right here, right now.
Are you using it right now?
No, I'm not using it right now. I connected my Bluetooth, but I can just show it to you on camera. Let me just see. One sec. So I don't know if you can see. This is the one.
Yeah, I can see it. Does
Yeah.
it have a 3.5 mm jack or USB one?
No, this is a USB one.
Oh,
Okay.
great.
Yeah. So this is a USB one, and the benefit of USB one, the sound quality is better. I think there is more noise in stereo jack, and also you can use your headphones separately. Yeah, Sumit just posted that link. It's the same microphone, Sumit. A04
A04.
condenser.
Okay.
Yeah. So the benefit of USB is that you can still plug your earphones or headphones while you are recording. So all of that is possible in a USB mouse, sorry, USB mic. And so there is not there is not a lot of noise reduction inbuilt in the mic. You get very expensive mics for that. You can, there is no uh, upper range for that. The technology keeps getting better and better. But to start, I think you can start with something like this and experiment with that. As long as you're recording in a quiet room and especially quiet time of the day. So I generally record at something like 5:30 in the morning or after 11:30 in the night or 11 in the night when things are generally quiet. Otherwise, what happens, some vehicle, some car uh, reversing and whatnot, and especially in the night, what happens when everything else is quiet? Then you start hearing dogfight. So there are all sorts of challenges in getting a quiet environment, but again, it's a matter of just keep trying. So my favorite time is early morning. 5:30, nobody is awake, not even the dogs. You start hearing some birds, but I think the bird sound is okay for background. So that's what I do.
Okay.
Swati had a
Thank-
question.
Sure, sure, Sumit.
Swati, go ahead.
Yeah, sure.
Okay,
So I
Swati.
am just because I really don't have any idea about podcast, and I'm just thinking which one is best. One of my friends suggested Anchor, but I really don't know how to start. Likewise, he's sharing his experience, and I really don't know. I believe other people they might have a slight idea. So if you can just please throw some more light on that, if the time allows, and if you think it is, uh, you know, like fruitful to discuss.
Sure,
And
Swati. So yeah, I was anyway going to cover this part, but I think we can cover that now. So it's a little bit of maybe it will take about 5 to 10 minutes to describe. So let me just take a step back. There are two things in podcasting. Okay, so if we take the journey when you have recorded something, and I think most of us are aware of MP3 files or any audio file for that matter. So there are different formats like WAV or MP3 and so on. But let's talk about MP3 only. So once you have recorded your content and you are happy with the quality of recording, probably you have also put background music and all the cleaning up, getting rid of noise and whatnot. So let's say you have a 5-6 minutes recording ready. That is the first step in terms of the technology aspect of things. Now there are two things. One is hosting and second is publishing, and both of them are different. So initially, it can be confusing what is hosting, what is publishing. So we'll spend a couple of minutes to understand that. Hosting is the part where you actually upload your audio file. Okay, so think of it your home or your base platform. So that is where your audio file is going to be forever, as long as your podcast survives. And publishing is the platforms that will take that input from the hosting service and they will make it available on their platform. So to give you an example, services like say Anchor. Anchor is a hosting service predominantly. You can obviously use it as a player and uh, as an app also, but predominantly or primarily, this is a hosting service. That's where you upload your audio file. Similarly, in India, there are services like Hubhopper, Kuku FM, and I think a couple of others also. But as far as I know, Hubhopper is the most popular hosting platform in India, and both of these are free. Anchor is free, Hubhopper is free, Kuku FM is free. But there are a lot of paid services also, like Lipsin is a paid service. It's a premium service. Then there is something called Buzzsprout. So most of the professional podcasters who really want to make money out of it and who really want to reach millions and millions of people, they use a paid or premium service. For the very reason, one, you get a lot of personalized service, you get a direct relationship manager and whatnot, plus a lot of tools about monetization, like getting sponsors, getting some ads in between, and all those kind of things. You can do that in Anchor also. You can do that in Hubhopper also. It's just far more easy when you use one of those premium services. So that is the difference. So we talk about hosting. That's where you upload your audio file, and that is going to be the home of your audio, and the publishing service.
I
Publishing
have a thing.
services.
I'm so
Sorry,
sorry I'm
Swati.
interrupting. Yeah, so initially, as a beginner, I believe one should start with the free service. And then later on, when things are working, then we should move to the paid thing. Because when we are confident also and we really have an idea, what do you suggest? How should we do that?
Yeah, absolutely. So, like I said, even in Anchor, monetization, sponsorship, all those things are not a problem. Even scaling is not a problem. So, you can have millions of listeners even if your podcast is hosted on Anchor. So, those things are not very different, really. And this was my question also, when I was about to host, and everything seemed so good about Anchor that I started asking question, how is that possible? They are offering so many services uh, for free and very good quality interface, dedicated customer service, whatnot. So I asked this straight question to Anchor, what's in it for you? So they said, uh, the way they make money, once your podcast becomes super popular and you start having ads and those kind of things, they keep a cut from that. That's how they make money. When we make money, they make money out of it. But until then, it's all free. So they provide all,
Okay.
this truckload of very good services and features, all for free. So initially, it's basically there is nothing in it for them. But again, they say, no, there is no free lunch. So they are obviously capturing user data. They are obviously capturing what kind of podcast people are listening to, and they're using all of this insights and all of this analytics for obviously advertising purposes and whatnot. They're not using your personal data, but obviously the trends and statistics, they're using it for various purposes. So, yeah, I think somebody asked a question. Rita asked a question. Which company is this? Yeah, Sumit, you answered. Anchor FM. So, Anchor is a very good platform to start with. Very simple to use, very efficient. It's fast. It doesn't take much time. It gives you good statistics and analytics and whatnot. And there is a mobile app as well. And the best part is there is an inbuilt studio in Anchor. So you don't really need any other software if you're just doing basic podcast. You can open your Anchor mobile app and you can start recording in that app. So it's pretty easy. And they give you some background music also. There is some free background music. And now the good news is Anchor is owned by Spotify. Spotify acquired Anchor last year. So Spotify, you already know that it's one of the biggest music collections or streaming services in the world. I don't know if it's number one or not, but it's neck and neck with Apple Music and others. So in fact, for podcasting also, I think almost 15 to 20% listeners across the globe, or maybe more, they use Spotify. So it's a very good thing that it's Anchor is owned by Spotify now. The biggest benefit is that the moment you upload your podcast on Anchor, it goes out on Spotify. So there is no delay at all. Right? So yeah, coming back to that initial question, Anchor is a very good platform to start with.
Okay,
So,
thank you so much.
sure.
How about SoundCloud as a hosting platform?
SoundCloud is not very good for podcasting as yet. I mean, it's very good for independent music producers, and if you are a singer or a musician, it's still predominantly used by those artists, not so much by podcasters. SoundCloud, I think it's a bit late in the game, but they are trying to catch up now. So I don't know, maybe in few months' time or maybe in a year, they may be competing with people, but not at this stage.
Thank
I think there you have to individually push the RSS feed separately. SoundCloud
Yeah.
doesn't do that intuitively.
Exactly. So there are a lot of legacy things. Plus, it's expensive. If you want to use their premium services, SoundCloud becomes super expensive. Probably the most expensive of all, because I think the benefit of SoundCloud is because it's used by so many artists, so their outreach is already there in the music world. So if you are making a podcast related to music specifically, then it may be a good idea. But again, to use their features, you have to pay money, which is not the case with others. So yeah, so hosting is the first part. Once you have hosted on Anchor or Hubhopper, and the big difference between Anchor and Hubhopper really is about Hubhopper helps you in publishing on some of the Indian platforms. Anchor doesn't do that. On Anchor, you have to do that manually. So, for example, okay, before that, let's understand the difference of what hosting and publishing. So, we spoke about hosting. That's where you store your audio file. Now, your file has been stored on cloud on one of these platforms. How does it reach users? So, for example, we have 20 people in this group right now, and out of all these 20 people, Sumit may be using Spotify, Arun may be using Apple, Angel may be using, I don't know, Google Podcast and whatnot. So all of these services, they help in playing podcast, making playlists, just like what we do with music. There are options like play next, add to queue, and then you naming your playlist, and you can download some of it for offline playing. So you can do all of those things like sleep timer, you can increase the speed of play. So all of those things you can do with players and these apps. So these are all publishing platforms. So we call them podcast directories also. That's where the podcast is listed and it's available for listeners and users. So that is the big difference. Hosting is one, and then all these applications which make it available to the users. So, just like in oil and gas, I use this analogy. There is one side where we extract oil out of the ground, which is called upstream. And then we have all the petrol pumps. That's where we take our car and fill the petrol. So that is the main difference, really. And there are so many applications. In India itself, I think there are 20 odd applications which enable you to play music and podcasts. So Ghana is, I think, number one. We have JioSaavn, Wing, we have Hangama, and a lot of others. I think Avaz.com, Pocket FM, Headphone FM, and now we have Saregama, Karwa. So many applications. And basically, so when you publish your podcast, there is no limit. You have to decide where all you want to publish. So Anchor helps you in publishing on all the major global platforms like Spotify, Google, Apple, and all of those platforms. Whereas Hubhopper, they've got some exclusive deal with Indian apps. So they help you in publishing on Ganas and Winks of India. So that is a big difference. So if your content is specifically targeted for Indian audience, or if it's in Hindi or any other Indian language, say Marathi or Tamil or Malayalam, then I think Hubhopper may be a good idea, considering they've got some exclusive links or deals with Indian applications. So that is the main difference. Snehal is asking Hubhopper what? So Snehal, I think Sumit posted a link to Hubhopper in the chat. Thanks, Sumit. So Hubhopper is another hosting service. Again, they have their own player application also, but predominantly it's a hosting service. So that is the main difference. I hope that's clear now. Hosting is one side of things and publishing is the second side of the story. So you always have to remember the difference when you are uploading your podcast. And like I think Sumit said earlier, that in some cases, like in case of SoundCloud, you have to do it manually. Once it is hosted, there is a link that is provided by your server, and that link is called RSS feed. So RSS feed is kind of a link that these applications will use to access your original audio. So that is something that you need from the hosting service, which is published the moment you publish your podcast for the first time. And all these applications, they use your podcast using the same link. Now, what happens when you host it for the first time and when you push it out to directories for the first time? It takes about a week or two, because all these applications, they review these podcasts. In some cases, they review manually. So just to make sure there is, the content is not something they don't want on their platform. Just like the rules we have on Twitter and Facebook, what you can post, what you cannot post. So they do that kind of initial review. And once that review is done, then your podcast goes live. So initially it could take about a week or two. Google used to take 3 weeks. Now I think they have cut it down to about 2 weeks time. Ghana still takes about 2 weeks time. So there is that delay. But once that is done for the first time, next time when you release your second or third episode, that will be super quick. It can take between 30 minutes to go out on other platforms to 24 hours. But 24 hours is generally max. Ghana still takes about 24 hours. I don't know why. But once you record and upload it, and say, today is Saturday and I upload something at 6 o'clock in the evening today, on most other platforms, 90% of the platforms, it will be available in the next 6 to 12 hours. But in case of Ghana, it may take a little longer. But it never takes more than 24 hours, at least not in my experience. So that's the difference. Initially about 2 weeks, but once the first episode is out, then it's a matter of 24 hours max. So this is the technical flow of, once you have recorded the audio, how it goes out and how it reaches to users. So we just need to remember these two things. Hosting service is one and publishing service is the second one. And it's always a good idea to save all the links, like where it's posted on Ghana, because that is very helpful in sharing. If you want to share it on, say, Facebook or Instagram, LinkedIn, wherever, then all those links, they come in handy. So it may be a good idea to keep some kind of an, online document where you can keep storing those links. And if you have your own website, then you can always update all these links on your website. There are many services, like there is something called Linktree. Linktree enables you to keep all the links in one place, and you can just share the link of that Linktree, and the people go there, and wherever they want to listen, like there'll be a link to Spotify, there'll be a link to Apple, Google, Ghana, or whatever else. So it's, just one-stop shop. So there are many services like that. But also there are free websites on Google or WordPress and many other services where you can provide that kind of a feature. So in my case, I created my own website It was free on Google, so I created arisudan.com, and that's where I keep all the links. So at least I also have an idea what all links are available there. Yeah. So this is the technical side of, once you upload and what happens with that. I'll take a quick pause. Any other comments, questions?
Can you not have all the links on anchor.fm?
Anchor gives you a feature to have, I think, some 10 or 11 links. But if your podcast is hosted on more platforms than that, published on more platforms than that, then you need some other place. So Anchor gives you links to Spotify, Google, all the key global platforms.
Thank you.
So I was wondering if you have one piece that you've made, so you put it on different platforms, is it? You can put the exact same thing on different platforms, just like you kind of put a blog into different LinkedIn, Facebook, whatever other platforms you have. Is that how it goes?
Yeah, so very good question. I missed including that when I was talking about it. So your audio file is one. You recorded something once, let's say your 5 minutes audio. You do that only once, and you upload it only once on your hosting service. So for example, if you're using Anchor, you upload it on Anchor, and that's about it. Now, all other platforms, publishing platforms, they will access the same audio on Anchor. So you have to do that only once, and it will be populated across, even if you are hosted on, say, 30 or 40 platforms for publishing, it will go out to all of those 40 platforms within the next 24 hours. So that thing you have to do only once. You don't have to go to individual sites and do that again and again. No, that's not the case. Some saving grace there.
And is there unlimited storage on Anchor, or how does it work?
Well, they say it's unlimited, but I don't think anybody has tried that yet. So there is a restriction in terms of duration of each episode. So in their free service, I think the max you can do is about 90 minutes episode at a time. But you can have as many episodes as you want. At least I have not heard that anybody has reached that limit. Yeah. And these audio files are not super HD quality, so their size is not very big because podcast is not music. So you don't really have to have something which is ultra HD or UHD kind of a thing. In case of a podcast, your 5 minutes audio could be just about 4 MB. And at the same time, if you listen to a new song, which is 4 minutes in duration, that could be about 15 to 20 MBs because of the sound quality. But in podcast, because most of it is speech and some background music, so a reasonable quality is good enough. As long as it's clear, there is sufficient stereo effect, all of those things, that's good enough.
And is Audible sufficient for doing that initial mixing of music and?
Yes. So again, that's a good question that deals with the audio editing part. So, when you start audio editing, so first of all, whatever software you use for recording, either some mobile application or something on your laptop. So the most popular software or applications like Sumit posted, Audacity, that's probably the most popular platform for recording and editing. The reason is it's free, it's open source, and for a change, there are no ads in that. So, and a lot of features, a lot of very good features to edit audio. So pretty much, everything that you need is there in Audacity because a lot of people keep adding those features as well. So that's the most popular application for editing. And people who have Apple laptops, MacBook, and so on, there is something called GarageBand, which itself is a very good tool, very good application. So most of the Apple users use that because it comes free on Apple. Unfortunately, that's not available on Windows laptops or any other machine. So that is the main difference. Apple guys, they use a GarageBand. Windows guys, they use Audacity. And there are some tools like Adobe Auditions. It's a paid service, and a lot of professionals use it because of some high-tech features in that. You can do a lot more stuff in Auditions. You can make templates and whatnot. So people who are totally into it, who are making money out of their podcast, they use something like Audition, or even at professional level. Agencies which record podcasts on somebody else's behalf. So, for example, if Shah Rukh Khan decides to start a podcast tomorrow, he's not going to edit his audio himself. He's going to outsource it to somebody, and that agency most likely will use something like Adobe Audition or maybe GarageBand. GarageBand is not that advanced. Most likely Adobe Audition, because that's probably number one. So that's the audio edit part. And so what happens, we were talking about the quality of voice and the sound level, those kind of aspects. So, this kind of level that we are talking right now, I can hear you okay, you can hear me okay, but you can always increase the sound a little bit. So, it should be somewhere there in the level of 50%. And you can see that when you record it, there are levels like 0, 50, 75, and 100. So, as long as it's somewhere between 50 to 75, it's good enough. Some new podcasters who are still experimenting with audio, some people record it really low. They don't realize it while recording because they are probably listening it with their volume up and with earphones and so on. But once it goes out on cloud and any application, and suppose you're listening to some podcast which was on okay sound quality or okay sound level, and suddenly the sound dips. So then you have to increase the volume. So that should not be the case. And as long as your podcast is recorded at the levels between 50 to 75, that's good enough. The idea is to give it out to your friends and some family members and ask them to play it on multiple devices, like either directly on mobile or using earphones or headphones, so they can tell you immediately whether the sound quality is good enough or not.
So this is 50 to 75% of recording volume, or what is it?
Right.
Recording.
Yeah. So there's something called waveform, but that's a technical term. And when you record in any tool, they'll show you, those sound waves you must have seen in movies and a lot of TV serials. When somebody is working on an audio, they try to separate sounds, like somebody kidnaps and somebody says, there was this train sound in background. So they try to find out the location, and that's when they show all those tools with sound waves. So that's exactly what you'll see when you start editing in Audacity or GarageBand or anywhere else. So there are levels given, and if I can share my screen, I don't know if I have the screen share rights yet. I can
You
show
have
you.
them. Yeah, you can share screen, right, Sumit?
Yeah.
Okay. So let me see. Yeah. So I'll share my Audacity screen. I hope you can see it. So it's pretty simple application. I mean, initially it may take a little bit effort, but if you watch some YouTube videos, there are there are thousands of YouTube videos on how to use Audacity. So it's not a problem at all. That's how I learned. I learned using YouTube videos only. And pretty much for all the features, there is at least one YouTube video available. So easy to learn. It may take maybe about a week to practice things, but after that, things are pretty cool. So as I was talking about recording, and if I open, some of my recent recording, let's say, uh, so you see here, there is a waveform on my screen, right? And if you see the level on the left-hand side, it says 0 is the baseline that is in the center, right in the center here. And on that, you have 0.5 and 1 kind of levels. So the idea is generally your audio should be touching this 0.5 kind of level, right? So as long as you see a waveform like that, like this sound quality is good enough. So when I publish it, it will be as per or probably at par with most of the other podcasts. So you don't have to touch your volume button, right? But there was another one that I recorded some time back. Let me see if I can find it. So yes, you see this one, and this one is really low. So this is not even touching 0.5 at many places. So the volume or the voice will be little softer, which means that somebody will have to up the volume to listen to it. Okay. So that's the idea. I mean, this is audible. This is perfectly audible, but again, the volume is going to be a little low. And some of the things you can do in Audacity, you can change the volume level. It's not like, you have to re-record the whole thing. But when you record, there is this mic level right here. So if you move it to say 70, 80%, then whatever you record, it's going to be recorded pretty loud, right? And anyway, once you have recorded, there is an option to amplify. So you can always amplify. So if I select this option, for example, you'll see the effect. All these, the whole waveform, it goes up, it balloons. So now it's much louder. But I don't want to do that, so I'll just undo. This was a poem that I wanted in little low note. That's how I recorded it. Yeah, but it's super easy to use. Audacity is super easy to use. All you have to do is just press this record button. Just make sure your mic volume level is set to say it should be at least 75. And whatever mic you are using, you have to select the microphone here. So my USB mic is not connected right now. If it was connected, it will show me the USB mic option. But you can see my hands-free is available. So I can use that for recording if I want to record something. So I don't know if it's going to allow recording right now. Let's see. Yeah, so whatever I'm saying, it's recording. And because it's connected very close, it's recording pretty loud. So yeah. So Audacity is super simple. All right. Any other comments? Questions?
Maybe I'm jumping ahead. This is Shankar here. If you have to have a podcast with 2 or 3 people at different locations, or even 2 people, say, in 2 different locations, do they both just need to have Audacity, and you set up like a Zoom or something? Is that how you do it?
So I think you're talking about something like an interview.
Correct.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So there are several tools for that. Zoom is obviously one of the most popular these days because everybody has been using Zoom for meetings. So in Zoom, you can record. So something like, current setup that we have.
Mm-hmm.
This conversation that we are having, we can easily record this whole thing. Kinjal is already recording this. And if you and I both are using a reasonably good mic, then our voice quality is also going to be good with minimum background noise. So Zoom is one, then there is Skype. There is something called Zencaster. So there are several apps to do that. But I think Zoom is still one of the most popular.
Okay, so when you record it, Zoom will give you a video file and an audio file, I think. And
correct.
So that audio file will be the same as an MP3 file you would record with pure audio, right? That will be ready for your publishing.
Right, it will be MP3 or MP4.
Okay, yeah.
So Zoom will give you an MP4, which is a video file, and once you upload that video file in Audacity, Audacity will automatically extract the audio out of that.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So yeah, that's simple part. But what a lot of people do nowadays, when they have these kind of meetings, they make it YouTube Live or Facebook Live.
Correct.
So there is a video version as well as there is an audio version.
Okay. Thank you.
And yeah, I think that's pretty helpful. Okay. So
My,
if we take
I
a
have a
step back in our conversation, we have spoken about technology aspect, which generally comes a bit later. But the first question to ask or the first questions to answer uh, basically should be the three-part thing, which we do for anything, even if you start a new business or uh, you embark upon something, a new initiative or a startup. So basically, we ask why we want to do that, what is it going to be, and how are we going to do it. So the why part, the what part, and the how part. So in my view, it's the same thing which is applicable to podcasting. Purpose, why you want to do that. That is, I think, is the most important part. Like initially, I described what was my purpose of starting a podcast. I was interested in Madhushala. I just wanted to make sure I explain the real meaning of the poem. I tell some stories. That was my purpose. That was my why. Because I was not able to find anything on internet, so I started it myself. So I think that is the first question to ask when you embark upon this journey of podcasting. Because what's happening right now, there are millions of podcasts out there. And what's happening that out of those millions of podcasts, nearly 40% podcasts, they don't go beyond episode 2 or 3. Because people do it as an experiment, they lose interest, and they just stop doing it. So that is also happening, and there is nothing wrong with that. But it won't be available to listeners. So, for example, if somebody made one episode and that episode was really good, I like that, but that person stopped making it after first or 2 episodes. So that is not something as a listener I would like to experience. So purpose, I think, is the most important first step. Figure out why we want to do that. And once we have figured out the purpose part of it, then comes the what part. What all we want to do in that podcast. What kind of content, what kind of story we're going to tell, what is going to be the topic. So all of those factors, and how part, I think, is the easiest part, because how part is all about learning. The tools are already out there. You don't have to create anything new. So as long as you have the why and what sorted out, I think you're good for the journey. The rest, everything is all, technology stuff. So when we initially think about these things, why, what, and how, and I'll focus more on why and what for now. Then you may also have to ask these questions like, what are actually people listening? What kind of content? What kind of format? What duration podcast? And which are the best podcasts on a certain topic? Your target audience, where are they located? Are they in India? They are outside of India? Is your podcast going to be in English for global audience, or it's going to be in one of the Indian languages? Then again, it could be gender focused to some extent. Like if you're making a podcast on women issues, women health, or about pregnancy, those kind of things, then that demographic you have to consider. If your podcast is focused on a certain section of society, so basically you have to think about all of that. In my case, my podcast is in Hindi, so I know that majority of those listeners are going to be in India, Pakistan, Nepal, Bhutan, and all these countries, and then to a large extent in the US and the UK, where we have a lot of Indians. And surprisingly, my podcast is most popular in Nepal. Uh, I think for the obvious reason, because there are a lot of Hindi speakers in Nepal. And I think Pakistan comes at number 3 or number 4. Because again, a lot of people in Pakistan also appreciate poetry. So those factors are there. So you just have to consider that demographic as well. US always ranks, I think, somewhere in the top 4, because there are so many Indians in the US. So, they always get to access and listen to these things. But surprisingly, some other Hindi speaking countries like Suriname, even Fiji, that is also shown in the overall footprint. So wherever you host, whether Anchor or Hubhopper, they show you very clearly where all your podcast is being accessed or being heard. So they show you a full list of countries. So if your podcast is heard in say 15, 20 countries, they'll show you a full list of all those countries, which is a very good statistics to look at. So those are the initial questions to be answered. And again, on the purpose part or the objective part, what problem is your podcast solving? Are you giving some history lesson, or you are talking about science, or talking about some fashion trends and whatever? But you have to figure out what is your main narrative, and you have to stick to that. I mean, you can obviously change it, but that theme has to be consistent. So these are the initial questions that we should answer, and I don't think anybody else can help with those questions. Those are some of the things that we have to sort out on our own. What we want to do, and why we want to do that. And if your podcast is going to be something unique, how you want to approach that. But if it's not unique, then it may be a good idea to listen to some podcasts on similar topic, how those people are doing it, what kind of things those people are covering, and how you want to differentiate your podcast, because there, like I said, there are millions of them. So how you want to differentiate. So those are all the initial considerations. Oops, sorry, I muted by mistake. I was saying I will take a quick pause if anybody has a question.
I do not know if someone has already asked this question. I have listened to your Madhushala podcast, and I do not know about your other podcast. Do you invite guests in your podcast?
I have not started inviting guests to any of these podcasts right now, because this is more of me reading about what I know about poetry and what my research is about Mr. Bachchan's life. So there are no guests as yet, but I've been thinking about starting another podcast on something to do with science. That's where I want to have it kind of a panel of at least 2 or 3 people at a time. So that's when I'm going to have guests. And also I host a session every Saturday night on something called Mensa, which is like Clubhouse, audio chat platform. That's where I talk about Madhushala, and that's more of a group conversation. So there are 2-3 people on the panel. So we talk about poetry, Madhushala, and some related things.
Which application you said?
It's called Mensa. I'll type the name of that. So Mensa enables 20 minutes audio chats. It's not like Clubhouse. So sessions don't go on and on. It's every session is 20 minutes, and after whatever we can cover in 20 minutes, that's about it. So pretty good for crisp conversations on various topics to do with business or psychology, human behavior, poetry, and all sorts of things.
Are you going to discuss Madhushala today?
That was not in the plan, Sheetal.
Sheetal, if Arisudan agrees, we will be having him back more often than he wishes.
More than he wishes,
we
yeah.
just hope that.
Sure.
So I think Rita had a question.
Yeah,
Sure.
I have a question, quick question. For an author, I'm an author. So is a podcast, is it useful? And how would the audience come to know about it? If I were to tell a story, let's say every week, every 15 days, then is it useful for an author, or you have to be an expert in a certain field?
It's very useful for an author, Rita. In fact, a lot of authors nowadays are using podcasting, because that's another medium to reach your readers or your potential readers for that matter, right? So, even if you get 2 or 3 additional readers after each episode, that's an accomplishment for a small time author. And if you are already, established author, then probably you'll get hundreds of new readers with each episode. So there are a lot of authors like probably, I don't know, many people must have heard about Malcolm Gladwell, who wrote a famous book called Blink and has written several other books after that. And similarly, Yuval Noah Harari, who wrote Sapiens, right? So both these authors have got their own podcast. Now, they don't necessarily talk about their books that they have written, but they talk about topics which are related to their books. And whoever is listening to them is getting some more insights in their work. And if they want to discuss their book and some parts of their books, even Devdutt Patnaik for that matter, he's everywhere on social media. So it will be surprising if he's not. So a lot of authors are using nowadays. It's a very good tool. You can also give some teasers about your new book. If you are writing something on a certain topic, and moreover, you can get feedback. If you invite panel or if you share it on, say, I think the second part of your question was how to reach people. You reach via Instagram, you can create short reels, you can create IGTV, Instagram TV videos, you can create Facebook post or Twitter or LinkedIn. There are so many social platforms. I mean, it requires a little bit of time. But if that is the purpose, then it's worth it. So you
And
post in.
Pardon me.
No, go ahead. Sorry.
No, this podcast, having created it, then does it get automatically reaches out to the audience, or we have to put in that effort to reach out to the audience?
So we covered that earlier, but let me quickly revisit that part. So you record it once and you host it once on a hosting service. So every time you record, you just have to upload it, just like you upload a photo. And once you do that, it will reach out to all the other platforms like Ghana or Apple or Google, wherever it's connected. So that effort is one time for each episode.
Thank you very much.
Once it's uploaded, then people will be able to listen to it. The other thing is you can get feedback from your readers. If readers and your listeners, say if you discuss your new book that this is what I'm trying to write and this is the topic I want to cover, your listeners can give some feedback via social media, or they can directly reach out to you. They can write emails. Like in old times, they used to write letters, and a lot of authors used to receive hundreds of letters every day, right? Postcards and those blue color inland letters, Antardeshiya Patra. Nowadays, it's all about email and social media posts, instant gratification. So you receive that kind of feedback. And if somebody wants to criticize your work, probably you'll receive that as well. But I think that's all part of the game. And you can always, include those things in your new story or whatever else you're planning to write.
That's right. Yeah.
So podcast, in essence, it's a very useful medium for authors because, it will just add one more dimension to what you're already doing.
Arisudan,
thanks a lot.
One question about bringing guests in the podcast. How do you ensure the audio quality of the guests if they're remote?
So that's a tricky situation. A lot of people face that day in and day out. So if your guest is somebody who has been giving interviews to a lot of people, then most likely they already have a very good setup for this kind of a thing. Right? So, let's take an example of some celebrities like nowadays during lockdown, every celebrity has been giving interviews online only. So pretty much everybody has got a very professional setup. I was in a similar Zoom session a few weeks ago where Nasruddin Shah was invited and some other stars. I think Tapsi Pannu was invited. So I saw everybody, each of them had a very nice studio kind of setup. So they have all gotten used to this kind of a, new normal. But for other people who have not done this, generally nowadays all the new mobiles are pretty good. They have got reasonably good sound quality. So using a mobile itself is a good idea. And you can always suggest if they have some good quality headphones or earphone like Bose, or not even Bose nowadays, Boat and so many other brands. They are doing pretty good. That is good. And there is something called a lapel mic, which goes onto your collar, uh, which is also not very expensive. So you can always suggest. In fact, I had one of those, this one. So that goes on your collar, and this can be connected to mobile or laptop, whatever, uh, and reasonably good sound quality. So as long as they're using, but my recommendation is to ask them to use mobile, because mobile already has a lot of good things, right? So, and ask them to use a quiet place, and you can also decide a time of the day when things are reasonably quiet. So that little bit of education, it's not going to be waste.
So do you mean that their audio would be stored on their mobile phone and then they will send that audio file to me, and that is the way it would be?
Not exactly. So that's one way to do that. That maybe uh, if you are doing a Q&A kind of thing, questions and answers, then that is not going to be the best idea, because you want question and an answer that follows in a very logically and smoothly flowing way. So then it's recommended you use something like Zoom or Skype, so that everything you say, and a lot of time what happens that you have a question and then there is a follow-up question. Sometimes that question comes out of what the answer is. So all of those natural things happen in a live conversation. You can't do that in pre-recorded versions. So that's going to be a difficult part. But if you are only asking for a soundbite, that you just give me a soundbite. What's your view on whatever what's happening in the world right now? Give me a 3-minute soundbite. That is something they can record offline. They'll send it to you in audio format, and you can include that in your podcast. So that is absolutely fine, and that works there. But for Q&A, it's good to have it live. I think that's the best thing.
No, probably I'm a little misunderstood. I was thinking that, so because I have a mic, on my side, so I will have a very good sound quality of my own voice. But while he or she is talking, because of her microphone, or maybe the lack of microphone, maybe her voice would be a little off, which would be coming through Zoom, to me, and that quality might be, a little less. So in that case, if the guest also at the simultaneously, recording on her side and send that audio file, probably her voice would be better there and my voice would be better here, and I mix them, both the files together, taking her voice from that recording and my voice from my recording this side. Does it make sense, or it's too complicated?
No, it makes complete sense. The only thing is it will require a little bit of extra effort, because then you have to take just those segments of audio. For example, your question is good on your side, so you'll keep that. But her or his answer, you'll take from their audio. And again, a lot of copy paste. So if it's a half an hour interview, you may have to spend about an hour to do that copy paste. But people do that all the time. So that's quite possible.
And do you feel that, because when you were saying that, it has brought me to the next question, is that when we are talking on Zoom, or when my guests are remotely, I mean they are placed remote, they are remote rather, could the conversation be that lively as it would have been if all the people in that podcast are in person?
So there is an obvious difference. In person, it's always more comfortable and more people do have more empathy because they can see you, right? Even in our offices, uh, we may be fighting with the customer, or customer may be fighting with us over a call or over emails. But when people are in person, then they are generally good to each other, because they can see what situation you are in, what is your surrounding, what is your environment. So that empathy factor is more in person. But in a live call, that is, that is something you have to create more comfort. So it's always a good idea to speak with people in advance, kind of a warm up, talk about the topic, uh, send your questions in advance so people are comfortable. Maybe, they have to get some data points so they are ready. So all of those things, little bit of practice, few conversations beforehand. And once finally people come on the same platform, they are more comfortable with each other. But in person is obviously, it's a different ball game altogether.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Sure.
Shankar has a question.
I have two questions actually. I'm sorry. One
Sure.
is, what is the optimum frequency for having these podcasts publishing? Because you have some places, I mean, if they have a lot of resources, they can do one day or one every 2 days. But if it's just an individual in a room, you have to strike some kind of balance where you have regularity, and you don't want to fall out of mind. You don't want to fall off the grid, but you don't want to overload yourself, right? So once a week or once every, how do you do it? Do you have a lot of assistance for you for doing it?
So that's a very good question. And it's a typical podcasting question as well.
Yeah.
Quite debated also, depending on the content. So basically, there are two things. One is the duration of your podcast. Second is the frequency. So let me cover both of them. I'll try to answer both of them. Now, it entirely depends on your topic and your content. Okay, so that these are the top 5 stories of the day. That has to be very short. Can you hear me okay? I got an error message that internet connection is unstable.
Yeah, I think you froze for just a second, but now it seems fine.
Okay. So entirely depends on that. So if somebody is creating a news bite kind of a podcast, that will be top 5 stories of the day, the duration might be super short, like maybe 5 minutes or 3 minutes. And same is going to be the frequency, because the news bite has to be updated daily. So it has to be like 5 times in a week or all 7 days a week. Some people do it all 7 days a week. Some people do it 5 days a week, leaving the weekend. So that's one format. If your podcast is something like a certain topic, let's say some science topic, or some future tech kind of a thing, or some review of mobile phones or new technology or whatever else, it may be a weekly story. And when it's a weekly story, it's you can cover that weekly recap of things. So in my oil and gas world, for example, we have certain podcasts which cover the whole weekly wrap. What happened in last 1 week? What were the decision? What's going to be the impact on the market? So that is of about half an hour duration, and that comes out weekly. Now there are some podcasts which are monthly. Even my own podcast is a monthly podcast, because I need a lot of research. I need to read a lot of stories about Mr. Bachchan which are not available easily. So I have to look for many resources and go through several books and find out for each poem what could be the potential story and those kind of things. And along with my day job, I can spend just about, say, half an hour every day, or sometime over the weekends. So I cannot do it very frequently. I do that monthly. And the same thing goes for a lot of other research podcasts when somebody is talking about history. For example, there is a very good podcast on industrial revolutions, where the host covers Industrial Revolution 1, when the steam engines were invented, paper was invented, talking about Luddites in the UK, talking about the whole bourgeoisie. So that requires a lot of research and a lot of data points. So this guy releases one episode every month, and that one episode is about 1 hour duration. So, these two things are interlinked, the topic, the content, and the duration and frequency. So depending on what could be your topic, if you are doing some kind of a weekly recap, it's best to have once in a week and maybe half an hour duration at most. Now, podcast should not be like a 1 minute thing. That is not really a podcast. It may be a soundbite. I mean, there is no set definition of a podcast. So as long as it's uploaded and it's an audio format, people are going to listen to it. But it should be at least somebody, you are going for a morning walk, and at least it can play for 5 minutes to 10 minutes. Excuse me, without a fast forward or anything like that. So that is advisable. But again, it comes down to your topic and your content.
Thank you very much.
Sure.
I have a question. Can I please ask?
Yes, go ahead, please.
Yeah, so I just wanted to ask, like, do people use podcasts? Likewise, I take up few courses, and if I want to reach out to people, is the podcast the right thing, or is it like limited to certain aspects where we can use it, or is it on us? How do we do that, or do people like the ones who are taking certain courses and all, do they do that on podcast? And if like is there any way that I can find out and maybe I can listen to so that I can work on it on my thing? Is there any possibility of that, if you have any idea?
People do use podcasts for training and courses nowadays. In fact, in India also, there are podcasts about teaching languages, talking about various aspects of Sanskrit, Hindi, even Urdu. There are a number of podcasts that cover certain aspect of the language or the grammar every week. So a lot of people do listen to that. There are a lot of podcasts about kids, and considering lockdown, everybody is at home. People do make good use of such audio, where somebody is teaching about something like for young kids. Grammar Girl, Anand gave an example, and there are many stories also. Kids listen to those stories, which are not necessarily in textbooks, but those are helpful. So it is being used, and some people talk about the art of storytelling, even cooking podcasts, for example, because that can be easily done in audio. You can just explain these are the ingredients, namak itna, mirchi utna, whatnot, and that's about it. So people do use it for various training purposes also.
Just a quick question, like how do we look for the podcasts that are of our interest? Or likewise, I saw that there's some discover button on Anchor. Is it that how we reach out to different podcasts and search whatever we want to? Or there's some other way that we can reach out to whatever thing interests us and we want to listen to something of that kind of thing?
So multiple ways. I think easiest is the discover option.
Okay.
And if you use Google or Apple, they have even better searches. Spotify, for example, Spotify gives you a ranking also by each topic. Apple gives you the reviews and ratings as well of podcasts. Like if somebody has a 5-star rating, then it may be a good podcast. Somebody with
Okay.
1 star, not so much. So there are all these options, and by each topic, whether you want something to do with news and analysis, you'll find a lot of podcasts in that category. If you want something to do with art and culture, then that category will have its own podcast.
Okay.
So yeah, depending on the category.
Poetry also.
Poetry as well, yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Arisudan, I have a question.
Sure.
Based on the time limit, I had a question, but you spoke briefly about that because you do it once a month. So I want to get into the nitty gritty. How do you script after you are done with your research? How do you script the podcast? Like you have to fit it into a 15-minute narrative. And how do you divide the sections, introduction, opening, or the body, the conclusion, and how many words do you give it per minute? And how do you script it, or do you just go off the cuff while you're performing, or do you read from the script while you're performing it?
Yeah. So multiple questions, but very good questions, and those are all very relevant. And I think one of the main topic of our conversation today was writing for a podcast. Uh, that's how it started. So uh, basically, what happens now? There is an obvious difference, and it's a centuries old debate whether you read from a script or you speak live or spontaneously. Different people choose different ways, whatever they are comfortable with. If you listen to so many TED talks, a lot of people don't use any script in front of them. In fact, TED guys, they don't even encourage that, for that matter. Some people may be using some cue cards, or I don't think there is a teleprompter in TED talks. I don't remember seeing it. Some people do use slides as a visual aid, but a lot of the conversation, at least to you, it feels like it's live. People are talking right there and then, unscripted. But I'm pretty sure that there is a lot of preparation that goes into making of any single TED talk. And TED talks are generally, they are between 12 minutes to about 18 minutes duration, because that is the typical attention span of humans. So that recommendation for podcast also is that you make something which can hold the attention for at least 15-20 minutes max. Beyond that, it becomes very difficult, and people may want to break down your podcast into 2 or 3 different sessions and so on, those kind of things. And then there is something called which weapon of mass distraction in our pocket called mobile, which is always distracting with some or the other notifications. So all of those factors considered, you have to decide the optimum duration. Now coming back to the script part. So I have to write a script because I need to make sure that whatever information is there, uh, it's relevant to the topic. It's relevant for those lines that I'm going to talk about in a particular episode. So whatever stories they're fit in, whatever philosophy they're fit in, I have to make sure that it's written on a piece of paper. And the other thing that scripting helps with it helps you with storyboarding, coming up with a story, because you can see the structure, whatever you are writing. Uh, you know, uh, as an author, probably Rita can vouch for it that when you write something, you can actually see the story building, which is very difficult if you are just talking without any preparation or without any script. So script is helpful in bringing that story into a structure. That's number one. Number two, the important part about whether you want to read from a script or you want to speak as is. So when you read from a script, it's easy for people to figure out that you're reading from something. You don't have that rhythm, you don't have that feeling in your voice and the voice modulation. All of that goes for a toss when you're actually reading from a piece of paper. It may sound very dull to many people. So for the final episode that you want to go live with, it's not recommended that you read from a script. You may have some bullet points, some anchor points, but you should remember the story around that. That is advisable, and that will require practice. So if you read your story or your script maybe 2 or 3 times or 4 times, and once you're comfortable with those stories, then go ahead and record it. Then you don't need to look at the whole thing while you are recording it. So that's the main thing. But having a script handy is always a good idea. Also, you want to make changes later to your episode, to your recording. Then you have to look at your script, what was there, and you can first make a change there, see how it looks, how it sounds, and then put it back in wherever your hosting service is. So that's the second part. And I think you also asked about intro and the outro and the mid-row part of your episode or your recording. So intro in the beginning, it's advisable to keep it short. In my view, because I've been listening to so many podcasts, so I don't like an intro which goes on and on for a minute or so. I'm okay if an intro ends within 20 to 30 seconds, that I am so and so, this is my podcast on a certain topic. Last week we covered this week we are covering this. That's about it. And then outro can be a little longer, because by that time people have already completed listening to your podcast, so you have some luxury there. So you can talk about things like, you can review my podcast on Apple, iTunes. You can contact me on Instagram, Facebook, wherever. So you can push all of that information as well. But again, to be careful, if your podcast duration itself is about 10 minutes, it's not advisable to spend more than a minute on intro, mid-row, outro, all put together. All of that should be completed within 30 to 40 seconds kind of a time frame. So that's the thing. And again, within intro, mid-row, and outro, there is a scope of putting sponsor message or some kind of an ad. So you have to leave some scope for that. Now, it's not advisable to have a sponsor message right towards the end, really, because people won't care if they don't like your podcast, they may stop it in between. But if you want to put an ad in the beginning, then it has to be super short, like 15 seconds kind of a thing. And it's advisable to have a mid-row ad if you have ads, and that could be even 30 seconds. That's okay. If your podcast is of duration, say 30 minutes or 40 minutes, then you can have a 30 seconds ad also, and that's perfectly fine. So those are the things one has to be careful about, putting ad or how much duration. But the main thing is, you have to think as a listener, what would you like to have in a podcast? Right? So if you listen to, and again, I did not cover that when we were talking about the what, why, and how part of things. But it's very important to listen to podcasts before you actually create your own, because then you get a view what people are doing and what, as a listener, you like. So you can then put yourself in the shoes of a listener. So then okay, this is what I don't like, this is what I like. I used to listen to a podcast, for example, that was about 9 to 10 minutes long, and it's a daily podcast about science and curiosity. And they used to have an ad which was about 90 seconds. So imagine 90 seconds gone out of 9 minutes. That's 10% of your listen time, and you don't like that. So as a listener, I didn't like it. I gave the feedback. Fortunately, even though it's a super popular podcast, they got millions of downloads, but they heard my feedback and they changed that. They divided their ads into two parts, 15 seconds each. So it was not kind of, interrupting or a hindrance. So podcasters do that all the time. Okay, Swati
I had
asked
a
the question.
Yeah. A lot of us here are fiction. Can you hear me?
Yes, Sumit, I can hear you.
Yeah. A lot of us here are fiction writers, and of all the podcasts I've listened to, the percentage is quite small for fiction podcasts. So how do you suggest we go about it? Like, there are episodic podcasts, like they used to do radio shows back then. Welcome to Night Vale has one. New Yorker has a fiction podcast, but it's only short stories. So do you have any ideas or suggestions on how do we, or is it advisable in the first place?
Oh, yes, for sure. So I think there are a lot of fiction podcasts nowadays. See, initially it was a very scholarly and academic activity to create a podcast up to, 6-7 years ago. But in last 6-7 years, there have been so many varied topics, fiction, stories, poetry, comedy shows, and whatnot. So fiction podcasts are becoming pretty big. So if you go to an app like Cuckoo FM, for example, or Pocket FM or Headphone app, you'll find hundreds of fiction podcasts now. And I don't know if you've seen Pratilipi.fm or Pratilipi website. There are so many stories, hundreds of them. Not all of them good. Probably 80% of them are crap. But there are some good ones also.
But they're very
Because
long stories. But
yeah,
they're very long stories.
right. So I think it's a mix of long and short. Uh, so if you go to Cuckoo FM, for example, and if you look at categories, you'll find all sorts of stories ranging from 5 minutes to about 15 minutes long.
Also, I had one more question. What do you think about podcast networks? Like, we have IVM in India. So, what's your opinion on that?
So those are the kind of studios, which is, I think, a good thing for the overall podcasting ecosystem. So as a studio, they create professional podcasts. They get some celebrities also. They get some good content because they spend money on building a podcast. It's not like you and I, we as hobby podcaster, doing something which is our own research, our own audio editing, and all those things. But a studio like IVM, they have that firepower. They have good celebrity connects. They can get some people in those podcasts to make it very popular. So I think that's a good news for podcasting in general because the overall quality goes up. And for listeners also, it's a very good thing. So again, a lot of people confuse between IVM being a hosting service or a publishing service. So they are neither of those. They are not hosting service. They are not publishing service. They are a producer. They produce podcasts just like you and I. But they also use a service like Buzzsprout or Anchor or something else to host. Now it's another thing that they've got their own app which you can install and you can listen to all IVM podcasts in one place. But they are not hosting or publishing service. They are a studio making some very good professional podcasts. And I think nowadays there are several of them. Like HT Smartcast is one which is owned by Hindustan Times. There are some Spotify originals where Spotify is investing money. So there are several of them like that. Even Netflix is coming into that game.
Arisudan, can you hear me?
Yes, Kinjal, I can. Yes.
Yeah, so I wanted to ask you that curating something like Madhushala, which is a classic piece of literature, into a very modern format like podcast. So how do you see the game playing out? Like, scenario in the future with voice technology. Do you think that that is how all classical literature will be read, and we should gear towards reading these pieces in a new format, or how do we
I think Kinjal froze.
Yeah.
change how we write?
Kinjal, we lost you for last 10 seconds.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, yes.
So part of my question was writing your own poetry on paper and then also writing for podcasts. Do you find yourself writing differently or writing from a different mindset, or is there a different need you're catering to when you write for podcast and when you write your own pieces for poetry?
Right. So I think two, three parts there. Um, and let me go by last in, first out thing because I remember the last part. But so, it's a natural evolution of things. Now people don't read poetry as much as they listen to it. So a lot of people you must have seen are creating Instagram reels or IGTV, even YouTube videos, YouTube short videos. So, the method of consumption is continuously evolving and changing, and nobody has control over it. It's a very natural way of things. And nobody should even try to control that. It's how probably, for us, video, audio, it's all a new thing for one generation, but the current generation, they are, for them, it's from their birth. They enter into a generation when YouTube was a normal thing. For us, YouTube was a very new thing when YouTube came into play. So, but that's a natural course of things, and that will take its own, whatever evolution form it takes. So that's perfectly okay. A lot of people, you are right. A lot of people now write poetry from a perspective or from that, with an objective that it's going to be an audio. It's not going to be a written piece of poetry. So how is that going to sound in an audio or in a video? A lot of people have started writing in that way. And from the story writing perspective also, and that question also relates back to the scripting side of things. When you read a book, say written by, probably written in Victorian English or a very good Hindi by the likes of Premchand or Nirala or Pant, it's easy to read that. And it's good to read that because then you truly enjoy those difficult words and very classy sentences and whatnot. But in a regular conversation, you don't want that Victorian English, right? You don't want a Shashi Tharoor and holding a dictionary for each word. And similarly with poetry, if it's very difficult when you're actually giving it a voice and people can't make sense of it, then it's no good for the current generation, right? I mean, people who have been into it for, say, 30, 40 odd years, they understand everything maybe. They understand that kind of language. For them, it's okay. But for a wide range of people, that may not be a very suitable thing. So you may write some very good words in your script, but when you speak, I think it has to be easy enough so people can understand, and also they can get that feel in those words. So I think that's the difference.
So you mean to say that basic writing language itself is different when you're writing for paper and for podcast?
That's correct. Yeah. I mean, if you're writing for a book, then obviously you can get into the very classy language kind of a thing. But when you are reading it for a podcast, for an audio, then you have to make it easy enough for people to understand in voice format. So, for example, if I just read out Madhushala and nobody can make sense of that, then it's no good. So, at least the script that I write around the basic poem, that has to be easy enough.
I have a question.
Sure,
In
Sheetal.
a podcast, do they have a video also? Can you have a video?
Not really. So, podcast is audio only right now.
Okay.
And that's how it started, because if you remember Apple iPod, just like Walkman or CD players, it was all audio and for music only.
Right.
So that's where the audio started, and it's like radio on demand. Like
Right.
in radio, you have 20,
Exactly.
30 channels. Podcast, you have 30 million channels, and it's on demand. You can pause and play and change between, and come back to that podcast.
Okay.
Having said that, lot of people convert their podcast into video also. I do that. So I make a YouTube version of my podcast.
Mhm.
And that's where I can give some subtitles so people can also read the poetry that I'm going to recite. So they can actually see the words, some difficult words which may be difficult to understand when you listen to it, but then you can read it on the screen. And also, if I'm talking about something, as an example, in one of my Madhushala episodes, I was talking about Tashkent and Armenia, some of those countries where Mr. Bachchan went. So I just give their maps, some photos from those places,
Right.
those kind of things. So it's more of a visual effect to your audio.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay. Thanks.
sure.
I have a question.
Sure,
Swati
Swati.
here. Like, which is like more easy, or maybe I should say, which is better, like using YouTube or podcast? Because I've heard from so many friends of mine that podcast is better, and your reach is more in podcast, and your reach is not that great as you compare it to podcast. So, can you please throw some light, as you've been using both?
Yeah, that's a very good question, actually. And again, this is also a very deeply debated topic. There is a famous song, Video Killed the Radio Star. I don't know if you heard that English
The
song.
first song that
No.
was played on MTV, right?
Right. So in this case, it's the reverse. Audio is killing the video. Okay. YouTube has been popular for last several years and immensely popular. There are millions and billions of hours on YouTube, and daily probably millions of hours are uploaded on YouTube. It's a super duper crowded place. If you create something on YouTube, there may be thousands of other videos on the same topic. Like, if you start looking for funny cat video, there are billions of funny cat videos. And if you talk about, say, in fact, it's very difficult to find the original song nowadays on YouTube. When you look for something, sung by Kishore Kumar or Hemanda from 1950s, you will find 20 versions which were sung by some 18 years old yesterday on top. And jab tak Hemanda ka gana aega, you must have scrolled I don't know how many videos. So YouTube is a very crowded place. Now, advantage obviously, if you get an original video on YouTube, then you enjoy those visuals and whatnot. But in audio, the other benefit is you don't have to look at your screen. It's just like your song and your radio. You can play and you can keep the mobile in your pocket or in your car or wherever. You don't have to look at the screen. The audio is going to play in passive mode. So that's a big advantage. Second, the discovery is easy because the directories are well structured. You want a podcast on, say, music or history or science. So you'll get only that kind of content under those categories. So that is something very good. Now YouTube has a premium version for songs, at least, where you can you don't need to look at the YouTube screen and you can still play music. But that's limited to music and you have to pay for that. But for podcast, it's by default. It's audio, so you just play it on your mobile, and using your headphone buttons, you can also fast forward and stop and pause and play again. So all of those things, that makes life a little simpler. And also, while doing something else, like you are in the gym, you are walking, you are cooking or driving, it's easy to listen to an audio than watching a video. So,
correct. Doing multitasking at a time, right?
Yeah,
in
exactly.
YouTube, it's not possible.
Yeah, I mean, if it's a panel discussion kind of a podcast, you don't have to pay full attention to that. It's just like a TV debate. You're listening to some parts of it, some parts may appeal to you. You may be ignoring some other parts of it. So that way, it's very cool.
Also, I think the speed at which people jump from one YouTube video to another is far quicker than when you're listening on a podcast. Your accepted commitment, you listen to it for a few minutes, maybe even longer before you accept. But YouTube, if I don't like a YouTube video in 10 seconds, I'm probably not going to watch it. I'll just keep skipping. So it appeals more to much shorter attention spans.
So true, Shankar. Very, very, very good point. The loyalty factor in podcast is much higher than YouTube. Yep. So if somebody likes my podcast, for example, most likely they'll subscribe to me or my channel, and they will listen to each episode, most likely. At least that's what I do. Some of the podcasts I like and I have subscribed to them. I listen to pretty much every episode that they make. So that loyalty factor is much higher. Okay, very good question from Swati. Is there any duplicacy check on podcast? At least I'm not aware if there is any automated check. And one of the things I said in the beginning, when you're about to create a podcast, it's good to do a research on that topic. What kind of existing podcasts are there in the market on the same topic? So, for example, you want to create a podcast on classical music, Hindustani classical. You need to find out what all podcasts are already there who are doing this kind of work, and within Hindustani classical topic, what part they are covering. So that is one way to check. It's easy to find. There are not millions of podcasts on certain topic. There may be hundreds or thousands. So it may not be a very difficult thing to just quickly go through that list. But I don't think there is an automated check right now.
Okay, because this question was troubling me since some time. I thought I'll ask. One more question.
It's not a centralized medium as such, right? As YouTube is a platform in and of itself. Podcast is like a website.
Okay.
Right.
Because with YouTube thing also, I just started in, so one of my friend, he's into it. He just was telling me, about YouTube thing. One more question I have. He was telling me that there are certain issues that happen if you're pulling out some image from Google and, somebody else has already used that. So some people come and, they claim and, there's some trouble or there's some challenges that you have to be very aware of, whenever using some image from Google, you're pulling out from internet.
That's
But is there
copyright,
something?
right?
Yeah, correct. Copyright, if I put it in the right way. And then is that the same case in podcast also? Or if not, or maybe that is not there in the market right now, maybe we'll have to do a research about it. Because this, I was just thinking, how it works in podcast.
So it's the same case, practically or technically speaking. And a very good example is whether you want to recite a book, like if you want to give a voice to a book. Now that's a copyright violation, simply speaking. As long as you're not taken permission from the author and the publisher, that's a copyright violation to read that book as is. And same thing goes for, whatever artwork you're using for podcasts. If it is somebody else's copyright, then it's not advisable to use it. It's easy to find out copyright violation nowadays because of so many automated systems. So it's not advisable. And the most prominent thing in podcast in terms of copyright violation is the background music. A lot of people use background music which is owned by somebody else. Now the good news is there is a lot of free music available, which is royalty free. It's available on YouTube. It's available on several other platforms. So go ahead and use the most suitable background music, which is royalty free. Nobody's going to question that. But if you are using something which is a copyright of somebody else, then at some point it's going to bite you. Nowadays, what happens if your podcast is not very popular, just about 100,000 people are listening to that, and you are not making any revenue out of it, people may not be interested in suing you because they won't get anything out of it. At the most, they may get you to shut down your podcast, right? But a company like T-Series or somebody, they may not find it worth to spend, 1 or 2 lakhs just to sue you in the court of law. But again, it's not advisable to use anything which is copyright protected. So even, same thing can be said for Madhushala. If I read the poetry as is, that's not correct. But in my case, it's more of, research on the poetry. So poetry is just about 5% of my episode, but rest of it is the conversation and various stories. So if you are discussing a book, if you are doing a book review, then it's not a copyright violation. And you can read some excerpts on that book, and you can always give credit that this book was written by Yuval Noah Harari, and I'm reading this para from this book. That's okay. Nobody's going to bother with that.
Is there
I
a
have a
duration
question.
for that? Is there like you can read, in sampling music, you have 10 seconds or something you can do. Like if you're reading, suppose you read 2 pages from Sapiens, is that not acceptable, or is it one paragraph is okay? Is there a cutoff somewhere?
I don't think there is. At least I'm not aware of that.
Okay.
But like
Every
I said,
country has its different laws, right? So you should probably
there are different country laws as well.
Yeah.
So with old authors and old poets, the norm is that if the poet or the author is no more, then 60 years after his or her death, that is still copyright protected. But 60 years later, anybody can use that. It's in public domain.
Okay.
Arun had a
Arun had a
question.
question.
Yeah, one question was about this copyright. Now, have you taken this permission for reciting part of Madhushala? Because we are planning a podcast there. We are going to read poems or short stories. So do we have to go to the writer or to the publisher to have permission? Probably you are suggesting that yes, we have to.
Yes. The
But
answer is yes.
But if we are not really only reading, we are reading only for the purpose of analyzing that piece, then is the answer no?
Then it's okay to read. So, if you're reading, say, 2 or 3 verses of a poem or a story, some paras from a story, that's okay, because number one, you are giving the full credit to the author in writing as well as in your voice. So that's totally okay. Uh, and same thing goes with your conversation, because you are analyzing that, you are reviewing that. So it's more of a discussion. Anybody can have a discussion in public forum.
So what happens if it is a short poem? I'm sorry, I'm just giving this example. So if it is a short poem or maybe a short story, and we would like to have discussion on that, and maybe we read part of that, or maybe read the entire poem, because it's a short poem, is it going to be a copyright violation? Do you know anything about it?
So that's a gray area. Right? I mean, by law, you cannot recite if the poet is still alive, or it's not been 60 years, or if you're not taken permission from the publisher. It's illegal. But considering it's a gray area, because you're discussing that poem and not just reciting reciting is not the only thing that you're doing. You can always justify that it's a discussion. And like I said, people may not take interest in suing you if you are a small player and your reach is not that much. But if you reach like millions of people with that, and if there is a financial interest involved in that, and that's when the dogs of T-Series and others are going to smell the blood and going to come after you. So I don't know if you remember this famous topic that Kumar Vishwas, he recited some of Madhushala, and Amitabh Bachchan actually sued him. Right? By that time, Kumar Vishwas had made 32 rupees, not hundreds or thousands, 32 rupees from his YouTube video. And he sent that check to Amitabh Bachchan. And he deleted his video, obviously. But that's what happened in reality. So, people do ask me if Amitabh Bachchan sues me for Madhushala. I said, yes, please, at least uski naam to hoga, it will make me famous. If there is some controversy around that. To justify or not, that's another thing. But again, it's a gray area. I wrote mails to both Amitabh Bachchan and Rajpal and Sons. Before starting that, I got no answer. I got one answer from Rajpal and Sons that, you have to reach out to this and that person. So I reached out to this and that person, but no answer after 2 follow-ups. So I thought, okay, let it be.
The next question is, sorry, please continue.
No, go ahead. I completed.
The next question is that, do you practice your pronunciation? How do you improve your voice? I mean, in your case particularly, because it seems your voice is perfect for a podcast. So what to do about that?
Yeah, I actually practice. And in fact, when I started, so I had no experience of podcasting. I had no experience of publicly reciting a poem before I started. So when I did my first recording, and I sent to some people who are well experienced in this area, who do some radio shows and make YouTube videos, people who know Hindi Urdu poetry really well, I sent it to a couple of those friends, and they gave me very constructive feedback that, you are reading it right, your pronunciation is also correct, but there are no feelings in that. The emotion is not coming out. There is no voice variation or modulation, which was all right, because I had no such practice. I was just reading from the script. I recorded, and it was kind of flat. So I got that feedback, and then I practiced, and I started reading from my memory rather than reading from the screen. So you already know the meaning. You are into that poetry, and once you have that feeling, then it becomes easy to put that into your speech as well. So it took a bit of practice. It took several re-recordings, but it got better with time.
So do you have any vocal training schedule? Do you?
Not really. I mean, there are YouTube videos for vocal training, like, people suggest yoga, that Om chanting, making that Om sound from your stomach. That is very good for voice, your vocal cords. There are a lot of other breathing exercises as well. People do recommend that you eat apple before you speak. Apple helps you, in getting rid of some of the sounds which your mouth makes or your teeth make. So there are some of those tips and tricks, but I'm not taking any voice training. There are voice trainings available around voice modulation and how to become an RJ, those kind of things.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Sure.
I think we've almost come.
I have a question. I was actually waiting for the end because I somehow had another meeting, missed a major portion of this meeting, and would definitely go through the recording. My question is, I wanted to start my own podcast that is back last year in around November, but somehow I couldn't, start it. So now, is there any proper online material available somewhere? If you can just, mention few one or two websites or maybe podcast itself. I listened to quite a few podcasts on how to make a podcast, but didn't get much help. So if anything online is available, which I will be easy, which will be helpful rather.
Sure. So there are tons of material on YouTube, but again, like you said, is structured. So Hubhopper has a series of YouTube videos freely available. I don't have the link handy, but I can send you the link offline. I can send it to Kinjal and Kinjal can share with you. So there is Hubhopper Studio. If you go to their YouTube channel, you'll find it. They got online podcasting class. I'm just typing the link of Hubhopper. So if you just search on YouTube Hubhopper podcasting class or something like that, you'll find they've got some well-structured sessions. What are the key steps in podcasting? Some of it is audio editing part, and basically all those key topics are covered in there.
Fine, sure. Thank you.
Yeah. And like Kinjal said, some of this was covered in the earlier part of the session. So you'll find some information in the recording. But there are some well-structured YouTube videos. In fact, I was planning to do something in Hindi on podcasting, but I just haven't had time to do that yet.
We'll take a quick picture before we end the session. So,
sure.
Everyone can turn on your cameras. Sheetal, Swati, Anita, Prathamesh, Anand, Tabrez, Gargi, Krishma, Jyotsna, Pratik. Please turn on your cameras. Okay. I think we can end this now. Kinjal?
If Arisudan has any last comments to add, I then pass the mic to Shankar for a formal vote of thanks.
Sure. So my the other advice is that I faced this problem myself when I was starting. I was not confident enough that my podcast is ready to go live, and I just wasted about 2 months on that. I recorded, I re-recorded, but it was very a pursuit of perfection, and I was stuck in that loop. So don't get stuck in that loop. When you think it's reasonably good, just go live with that. So I was stuck in that loop, and then somebody said, "Boss, just go live already," because good is better than perfect. So that's my advice. When you think it's reasonably good, you have some honest feedback from some of your close friends, and that's the moment to go live and get feedback from some of your most Kamina friends who do not hesitate to tell you, boss, this is something you can't do, this is something you can do.
That's the only kind of friends we have.
Yeah, they are the friends you should go out for your feedback, because they'll tell you exactly what is wrong, on your face.
Exactly.
I got that feedback, and that has been truly helpful. So yeah.
Arisudan, Shankar here. I just wanted to extend a very, very heartfelt thanks from all of us. I think we've been focused on writing in different formats. Some of it has been performance writing, some of it's been different lengths, poems, poetry, novels, fiction. But all of us came here with not much of an idea as to how to go about doing a podcast, how to go about starting a podcast, what was involved. And I can't believe how quickly the time has gone by. And you've been extremely generous and warm and accommodating of all our questions, silly or otherwise. So I just want to say thanks a lot. And I hope that we can have another session with you and bother you once more, at least.
For sure. I truly enjoyed. Honestly, it's very rare that there are sessions so interactive. Interactive sessions are the ones which can keep any speaker going forever. So,
can I ask you one more question?
Sure.
Thanks. So it's not on the record. When you started your session, when you started your podcasting, I read somewhere, I read somewhere online that you should have maybe 4 or 5 episodes recorded before you start publishing, so that you kind of hit the ground running. Otherwise, you have the risk of making one and stalling. Is that good advice? Is that feasible?
Yes, that's the advice. And it's totally advisable, because what happens, like I said, there are millions of podcasts, and out of those, about 30 to 40% do not have beyond 2 or 3 episodes, because people lose interest or lose that momentum and whatnot. So if you have material enough, or if you have already recorded at least 5 episodes, don't go live with all 5. Go live with maybe 1 or 2 to start with. But then make sure week on week or month on month, whatever frequency you choose, you go live with at least 5 of those episodes. If you can cross that barrier of 5 or 6, then I think you can keep going for another 20. That itself is a good motivation, right? And having a material ready, basically, some people are not motivated to do that research all over again. But if you already have material ready for, say, next 10 episodes, then it's a matter of putting it into your voice and just going live with it. So it's always advisable.
Okay, thanks.
Sure.
Okay, thanks a lot.
Sure. And feel free to contact me if you have any questions, even offline. Kinjal is already connected with me.
Yeah.
What are the ways people can contact you?
So I can share my Instagram handle and Facebook handle as well. So this is my Instagram handle, and Facebook, I think I don't have the link right now, but I can share that with Kinjal, and Kinjal can share further.
Yeah, I'll pass it on to the group.
Yeah, but this is my Instagram handle, so you can connect with me. And I'm on LinkedIn with the same name, so you can find me on LinkedIn.
Okay.
Yeah, for a very long time, I knew Arisudan as Ibn Battuta. I had not known his name for quite some time. Thank you so much, Arisudan, for joining us, and everybody who was present here today.
Sure. Thanks a lot for your very active participation. It was really good.
Thank you, Arisudan.
Thanks very much.
Take care. Stay safe.
Yes.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much, Arisudan.
Thank you so much for an amazing session.